Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into two of the biggest ways companies pay for their growth, leases and bonds. And we're going to decode the fascinating story these numbers tell on their financial statements. All right, let's start with a problem that every growing business faces. It's a classic situation that leads to some pretty interesting accounting. So picture this. A company is absolutely crushing it, growing like crazy. They need a huge new data center. Or maybe an airline needs a whole new fleet of jets. These are massive, game-changing investments. The big question is, how do they possibly pay for it all?
Well, they really have two main options. They can use the cash they have sitting in the bank, which, can really drain your reserves. Or they can finance it, and that's our focus today. We're going to explore two of the biggest ways they do that, leases and bonds.
Okay, first up, leases. Now, the word lease probably makes you think of renting a car or an apartment. But in the corporate world, it's a whole different ballgame. And for the accountants, it all boils down to one critical question.
At its core, a lease is just a formal rental agreement for a big-ticket item. A company gets all the benefits of using, say, a new piece of machinery without that huge upfront cost. But the devil is always in the details, and the fine print can make a lease look a lot more like a purchase than a simple rental.
And this is the central question accountants have to answer. Why? Because how they classify it has massive implications for how the company's financial health looks to the outside world, to investors, to banks, to you.
So to figure it out, accountants run the lease agreement through this 5-point test. And if the answer to any of these 5 questions is yes, it totally changes the game. It's no longer treated as a simple rental. It becomes something much, much more significant.
So a yes to any of those questions, boom, it's a finance lease. You should think of this like a mortgage on a house. You're basically buying it on credit. But a no to all 5 questions, that makes it an operating lease, which is a true rental, just like renting an apartment.
So, finance lease, operating lease, you might be thinking, who cares? Well, you should, because this little distinction makes a huge difference in how a company's performance is shown to the world. And this is where the story gets really good.
Now here's a twist. You'd probably think these two very different kinds of leases would look totally different on a company's books from day one. But surprisingly, they don't.
This is pretty wild. Check it out. Whether it's a finance lease or an operating lease, the company has to put 2 new things on its balance sheet, a right-of-use asset and a lease liability. This means that right at the start, both types of leases actually have a very similar impact on the company's financial position.
Which, of course, begs the question, right? If the balance sheet looks pretty much the same at the beginning, why did we go through all that hassle with the 5-point test? Well, the answer isn't about day one. It's about what happens next.
The real difference pops up on the income statement. You see, a finance lease gets split into 2 separate expenses, interest and amortization. But an operating lease? That's just one single, straightforward lease expense. It might seem like a tiny accounting detail, but trust me, it can really change the way a company's profitability and cash flow look from the outside.
So we've talked about how companies can finance one specific asset using a lease. But what if a company just needs a giant injection of cash to fund all sorts of growth? Well, that's where bonds come into play. Think of a bond as a company's way of crowdsourcing a giant loan. Instead of borrowing from one bank, they borrow smaller amounts from thousands of different investors all at once. Each investor buys a piece of the debt, and the company promises to pay them all back, with interest.
But here's the million-dollar question. If a company issues a bond that says $1,000 right on the face of it, do they actually get a check for $1,000? The answer is almost never. The price investors are willing to pay is rarely the same as the bond's face value.
The selling price of a bond is really determined by a battle between 2 different interest rates. There's the stated rate, which is the interest rate printed right on the bond certificate. And then there's the market rate, which is the going rate that investors can get on other, similar investments out in the world. It's this tug-of-war that sets the price.
And this relationship between the stated rate and the market rate creates 3 possible scenarios for the bond's selling price. Each one has a specific name.
This right here is your ultimate cheat sheet to bond pricing. If the company's interest rate is better than the market rate, investors will actually pay more than face value to get in on that sweet deal. That's a premium. If the company's rate is worse than the market, well, they'll only buy it if they get it for cheap. That's a discount. And if the rates happen to be the same, the bond sells at its face value, or what they call par.
Now, accountants can't just let that premium or discount sit there. They have to spread its effect out over the entire life of the bond. This process is called amortization, and it ensures that the company's financial statements reflect the true cost of borrowing money, not just the interest rate printed on the label.
I know this table looks a little intimidating, but the key takeaway is actually pretty simple. The amortization process gradually adjusts the bond's carrying value on the books until it perfectly matches the face value on the day it matures. It's all about making sure the accounting accurately reflects reality over time.
Okay, we have been deep in the weeds of accounting rules for leases and bonds. But let's zoom out and talk about why any of this matters to you, whether you're an investor, a student, or just curious about how business actually works.
Look, understanding these rules lets you see the full story behind the numbers. You can see how a company's leasing decisions might be making them look more or less profitable. You can see how bond pricing reveals the true cost of their debt. It's all about looking past the surface to understand a company's real, long-term financial promises.
So the next time you look at a balance sheet, don't just see numbers under liabilities. Ask yourself, is that a finance lease or an operating lease? Was that bond issued at a premium or a discount? Now that you know the rules of the game, what story are those liabilities really telling you?